All right. Again, welcome. I'm joined by my co-host, Allison. She's going to be playing the background a little bit. But we also are lucky to have another colleague of ours, a great person, a great asset to the digital promise community, Kristen. So let's kick things off. Again, my name is Stanley Berry. I'm an educator, engagement associate with Digital Promise. I'm looking forward to diving into the micro credentials with you all, and especially sharing the room with my co-hosts and all the great things that we have to offer for you all. So usually when we do our workshop, we like to open up with our purpose to remind everyone, why we're here and exactly what we do as a community. So the purpose of the Coach Powerful Learning community is that we bring together optimistic educators who are passionate about driving change for and from their schools. As we get into our breakout groups a little bit later, just be mindful that we're going to have some discussions and that, sometimes, we care about these subjects and we care about what we're talking about, but we just want to have a little bit of a guideline for, just how we talk to each other and how the conversation unfolds. So some community agreements that we're going to make are going to be speak your truth responsibly, be mindful to remain muted as someone else is speaking, and listen to understand. And one more thing that's not up here, sometimes we say that everything that we speak about in the group stays in the group. I like to think of this as a special place where folks can kind of tell about their experiences. And, we never know what some folks might think is a little too personal. So let's try to keep everything within our group. And we'll get into micro credentials. So, what are micro credentials and how can they support you as a coach? So, micro credentials are digital certifications that verify an individual's competence in a specific skill or set of skills. Micro credentials provide a pathway to personalizing and recognizing professional learning. They allow employers to verify the skills their employees demonstrate, regardless of where and how they learn them. Each micro credential is grounded in sound research that illustrates how that competency supports positive professional impact. So individuals can start and continue their micro credential journeys on their own time and in their own ways. Very important. And lastly, micro credentials can be added to your resume and online profile, shared with current and potential employers. So let's take a few minutes to kind of open up with the icebreaker, just something easy going to just get to know each other a little bit. So for this icebreaker, what is a recent learning experience that made you feel good? What was it about that experience that made you feel good? This could be a personal experience or something that you witnessed in your classroom. So feel free to use the chat if you're not comfortable sharing out loud. But if you are comfortable sharing out loud, feel free to unmute. We'll take a couple minutes for this. So let me, okay,
Stanley,
after
I'll
you,
check.
Jen.
Oh.
Okay.
I was like, I'll jump in. So a recent experience that I've had is actually leading and facilitating a workshop series on restorative justice in education. And this is something that I've been leaning into learning myself. And so I'm just very appreciative of my colleagues being able to accept and join me on that journey without expecting me to be an expert in it. And the reason I feel good about it is because of the excitement, the willingness, the openness of my colleagues who are willing to be vulnerable with me while we're learning and being reflective, because sometimes it doesn't feel good to be reflective, especially if we don't like what we see. We want to just turn away or we want to focus on something else. And so it's actually, even though it's been sometimes that discomfort, it's actually felt good to have others lean into the discomfort with me sometimes throughout that process.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Jen. And that's kind of where we're getting at. With micro credentials, it's a learning experience, and sometimes that can be uncomfortable. but it's something that ultimately can help us. So sometimes it's worth just kind of reflecting on what about learning is good for us, and how can we create that environment for the people that we're learning with, whether that be the folks that we're coaching or ourselves. How can we make everyone feel a lot more comfortable, a lot more open to learning? Thanks for sharing that, Jen. Let's take about another minute if anybody else wants to share. I see Matt shared that coaching tech resistant teachers to becoming more inspired using technology in their classes beyond the basics. And that's important because sometimes, once you get that foundation and you have to strive for more, it can be a little uncomfortable, or it can just be a little challenging. And that's good to note that, when you see that turnaround happen, that's a reward in itself. Thanks for sharing that, Matt. Okay, I see Helen says a recent experience as a teacher on vacation asked to meet with her to help plan an engaging session with critical thinking and discourse. I felt validated that she reached out to me, and I'm happy to share what I know and support her to be her best. Yes, I agree. That's awesome. It's always good. It always feels good to feel like you're adding to someone else's learning as well. That you can actually be a tool for learning, or a conduit for learning. I think that's a better way to put it. All right, y'all. We're gonna move along, but if you have any other icebreakers to share, go ahead and put them in the chat. So I am proud to introduce Kristen Franklin. She's our senior program manager of Microcredentials here at Digital Promise. She leads the development and collaborates with subject matter experts on rigorous competency-based microcredentials, as well as administers the microcredential platform at Digital Promise. So Kristen has worked in adult education for almost 20 or more than 20 years, ranging from informal museum learning experiences to undergraduate seminars on rhetoric and communication at Stanford University. Kristen has always loved teaching and learning and empowering others to do the same. Kristen has an MA from John F. Kennedy University and a BA from UC Davis. You can reach Kristen at kfranklin@digitalpromise.org. And with that, I want to introduce my co-host, Kristen Franklin. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Stanley, and thank everyone for joining us here this late evening, early afternoon. I'm on the West Coast, as you may have seen in the chat. I am in a small town called Albany, California, and I think like every single state may have an Albany, but I'm in the California one, just north of Berkeley and Oakland. But I've been part of Digital Promise for just about 3 years, but as Stanley mentioned, I've been working in adult and I don't like adolescent education for like all of my career. So really love the informal learning spaces, as well as just seeing those moments of understanding when it comes to either concepts or pedagogy or whatever we're discussing. And I was thinking of the Icebreaker, where I was leading a session with some folks last week about what's the difference in an assessment between like they totally got the concept versus they might not quite understand the concept, and what the difference was between them. And sometimes, like I think you all have done assessments with students, what the difference is sometimes murky. And so as we were progressing through this, I was sharing examples and things of that nature. And someone said, oh, it's about this. And someone else said, oh, that's right. That makes so much more sense. So this collaborative like understanding really started to come up. And so that was like, it was just last Wednesday. So that was the most recent joyous experience in education. And if you do hear something that sounds like an electric toothbrush, there's construction happening behind me. So if you have access, you may all have access to that reaction on the bottom part of your Zoom screen. If you've heard of a micro-credential before, can you choose the thumbs up symbol? If you've tried a micro-credential before, can you use the clapping symbol? Seeing a lot of, oh good, seeing some claps, seeing some thumbs up. Great. Thank you so much. So what I'm going to do today is, oh, and Stanley or Allison, do you mind giving me permissions to screen share so I can show my deck? Cool, thank you. All righty. Great. Okay. So yeah, so I really only have three things that we're really going to be discussing today. The first is like competency-based micro-credentials. Most of you have heard of micro-credentials before. A small handful of you have tried one before. So we're not going to spend a whole heck of a lot of time with that. But I'd like, because you all are coaches, to really talk about how micro-credentials can be both used within your own coaching practice, but also for, ongoing learning. And then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. But as Stanley was saying earlier, a micro-credential is a form of competency-based learning. And so how I also think about it in terms that we use throughout education is that it's a performance assessment, but it's skill-based rather than knowledge or information accumulation. So it is that competency-based system. And it's an assessment to determine if there is a competency or a skill. So if someone is working really hard on perhaps communication with families in their classroom, what does that look like? What does that skill mean to be competent at it? And where it comes from is really a lot of research. So all micro-credentials, as Stanley was saying, are based in research. They're basically like small research papers that are centered on a very specific skill. We're going to be looking at a couple of micro-credentials in a little bit. I've chosen one in specific that we can look at together. But I also wanted to mention that all of our micro-credentials are issued on the open badge standard, which means that if you earn your micro-credential, it's yours in perpetuity. Like if you earn it in Boston, then you move to Australia, like it's gonna go with you. It's not gonna stay in that silo. It's not gonna stay in that one school district. Like it's yours, you've earned it. And that's, we have a technical partner that we work with called Badger, which is the system that awards the badges. So we have a lot of different technical things that are going on at the same time. And that is part of my gig here. Okay. And so a micro-credential is competency-based, as I was saying. It's job embedded. So they're not designed to be this extra thing that you're going to be doing in your work, right? So you might already be coaching a number of teachers in the classroom. And so the micro-credential is really going to be coming right alongside you and within your work. So you might see micro-credentials in the platform that you're like, oh, I'm already skilled in that. Like I have all of this evidence to show that I'm skilled in this. Then you can just go ahead and apply and have the award, right? So like I said, they're meant to be just really matching what your skills are in your job, and they're on demand. So the platform is there at 2 a.m. if you can't sleep and you're like, well, maybe I should tinker with this a little bit. Hopefully you're not. And personalized, again, they're really meant to be directed at what your interests are. We've seen educators use micro-credentials as a mean for a goal. So we work with a number of school districts, and one uses micro-credentials as a basis for their professional development. So if there's a group of teachers that really want to be like the data analytics team in their district, using those micro-credentials as a form of like, everyone on our team has this competency, and this is why we are the folks in the district that are, the experts, right? And shareable, and I'll show you what this all means too. But essentially, there's just one thing that I think you all would be interested in using micro-credentials with your coaching practice, in that if an educator is denied a micro-credential, they'd be able to share with you directly what the feedback was on the micro-credential from the assessment, as well as their answers. So they'd be able to basically just show you everything that they submitted, as well as what the feedback was. So you can incorporate that into your own teaching with them. And then once they're awarded, they can share it wherever they like: Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, kind of all those typical places. And so I'm going to pause there, because I know I tend to speak a little bit quickly, because I get very excited about teaching people and sharing this stuff with folks. So I'm just going to pause and see if anyone has questions or thoughts or surprises.
Kristen, I just have actually a question for if this is going to be coming up as to one of the topics that you might be addressing.
Cool.
Is the, I don't want to say uncertainty and fear, but that I don't know how else to describe it, right? To
Totally.
where, and I'm going to speak for myself as well as other colleagues, to where when we think about possibly dipping our toe or jumping full on into the deep end around micro-credentials, what would you say? What is some verbiage? What are some suggestions? What are some points of approaches to help folks, especially as educators? Oftentimes we want to do it right. And I know that learning is messy, right? We tell our students that all the time, but sometimes it's hard for us to embrace what we preach. And so sometimes we say, ooh, this seems really big. I don't even know where to start. I'm kind of worried and scared about how I'm going to be judged, right? Because I mean, we're human beings. Everyone worries about being judged. And so because part of it is going to be submitting, as to your point, oh, I've got all this evidence. Some teachers are like, well, is this evidence good enough? And there is that fear of being rejected, understanding you get to redo it and resubmit it, but there's still some fear there. So if that's something on your docket later up, that's fine. If not, if you'd be willing to embed that at some point.
Yeah, I think I didn't have that kind of later on, but I think that's such a common question. I will forevermore add that in. But I think it's a really excellent point, because as educators, we are the folks that are in the classroom that is the expert for everyone else, right? And so there's definitely that fear. And I think it comes from a couple different places, in that, you know, we don't call these performance assessments out in the world because of that word assessment is so big, and it's like, oh, it means that I'm not going to be recertified with my credential and all these other kind of things. So I only use that performance assessment in smaller groups. So the thing that I do like to think about when we're talking about micro-credentials is definitely start with one where folks are the most comfortable with. And I say that because there's often a learning curve with a micro-credential, and then there's also possibly a learning curve with the competency-based learning, right? And so it's like, okay, there's micro-credential language, and then there's competency-based language. So I'm going to show you one called wait time, which is a micro-credential I use a lot in Suggest, because it's a concept that folks understand, but it takes practice, right? To do some wait time for 4 seconds, and then follow up with your class with further questions and things of that nature. So maybe starting with like low-hanging fruit, a concept folks are really comfortable with and feel like they're skilled at. And I think with the judge part, the feeling judged part of it, the goals of every single assessor is really for coaching for improvement and supportive of any sort of work that's being done. I work really closely with assessors and train them quite frequently to ensure that any feedback is positive and constructive and it's useful. And there's like, I think one of my main elements is like, you're not putting any sort of value judgments in there, because it doesn't, first of all, it's like rude, but second of all, it doesn't really have anything to do with what we're doing. Yeah, so I think those are the two things. Start with something that's low-hanging fruit, and also we're all here to serve educators and supporting them in their work.
So Kristen, to that point, are you also going to be discussing if there are any support features that are naturally embedded within specifically digital promises micro-credentialing? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and I'll show you kind of what the assessment elements and the rubrics and all those kind of things for sure. But that's a great question. Yeah. Cool.
I did actually have a quick question for you.
Yeah, please.
Well, so I browsed the site a little bit, and I'm looking. It looked like different people certified, each different micro-credential, if you will. Different people were offering that course. How does that work?
Yeah. So Digital Promise, yeah, it's a good question. So those are issuers essentially, and those are subject matter experts. So each organization that hosts their micro-credential works with us to make sure that their micro-credential has a certain standard to it. So has a standard of research, has a standard of assessments and things like that. So I work with them directly to make sure that they're written in, a certain standardized way. And then they come to the table with that subject matter expertise. So for example, the Iris Center at Vanderbilt has 4 micro-credentials around accommodations, and there's different types of accommodations. And so they'll be coming in and saying, this is what the standard for accommodations are, for sure. So they're acting as the subject matter experts. Did I answer your question, Shannon?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, of course. Cool. All right. I think what might be best is let's look at a micro-credential. I'm gonna make this a little bit bigger. And this is something that you all probably deal with every single day, is kind critiquing. And so this was written by folks at Digital Promise, I think 5 years ago. And it's all about feedback, like what is useful feedback under the guise of kind critiquing. And so what you'll see here, and I think of this as like a research paper partly, and as well as like an application, right? So as we're looking at this micro-credential, we see that we have the title, we have the apply button, and we have the competency statement. So a competency statement is a singular, usually 1 or 2 sentences about what someone does. And so this is all about like having good feedback. And then the key method is the main method by which someone is going about it. So the competency statement is what someone does, and the key method is how they do it. And so it's basically that the educator is providing positive feedback. And then method components would then go a little bit more broad into that key method. We can't just say, a 1-sentence key method and then that's it. We need to say a little bit more, like what are some best practices? What does supportive feedback look like? For example, the critique is given in a safe environment. So are there certain students that have sensitivities about being critiqued? Like what is that critique going to look like for them? As well as privacy. I think when I was doing teaching earlier on, punish in private, praise in public. I'm sure that there's a newer term to share that out loud, but anyway, so we're going to have characteristics of feedback. There could be suggested preparation and some of the micro-credentials as well as review. And as we're kind of scrolling down the micro-credential, we're going to see research and resources. And research, this one is a little light in research, to be honest with you. So I'd like to see a little bit more research that is accessible, as well as, so you'd be able to just read it without going through a firewall. But any research that we've used to develop the micro-credential language up above would be here. So that's the citations for the micro-credential. And then any resources. So I think of resources as something that an educator uses in their classroom all the time. So it could be a template, it could be a YouTube video, it could be pretty much anything that doesn't necessarily have like a bibliography at the bottom of it. But I think Edutopia is a good example of a resource because they don't publish their citations, but they have some good writers sometimes pop in, like Susie Boss or Elena Aguilar, folks like that. Okay, and so I think of that as like the first half of the micro-credential. And then the second half of the micro-credential is really the area in which we're asking for them to demonstrate their competency. Part 1 is almost always going to be a contextual question. Users are double blind, meaning that the educator doesn't know who the assessor is, and the assessor and the issuer are looking at the educator's submission. So we try to make sure that there's a division between those two, which is why we ask context questions from the educator. So if the educator is saying, okay, I work in a second grade ELA classroom in Louisiana, then they are giving a little bit more context about their evidence. So the assessor can say, oh, well, that's developmentally appropriate for a second grade ELA classroom versus 11th grade algebra or something like that. Yeah, so, and wanted to just, in light of supports that you were saying a little bit earlier, one of the reasons why we put all of our passing and not passing right up front is we want to make sure that the expectations are clear. We don't want to put anything behind a firewall or any sort of gotchas in this process, because we want everyone to just know what the expectations are and what the outcomes we expect those to be. So this is not a test. This is definitely something that folks can be prepared for. And part one is always a pass, not pass, because it's contextual. And let's see, yeah. And then part two is always going to be asking for evidence, and it's going to be different types of evidence. So this micro-credential is about feedback, and so we're asking for some work examples from 2 students that could be a variety of different things that demonstrate progress towards the kind critiquing, examples of critiques given, evidence of effective feedback, motivation, learning. So a lot of different things that we're asking for. And then we have a 3-part criteria. So it could either hit the yes, almost, or not yet. Thanks, John. And so we want to make sure that this is also up front so people are understanding what those expectations are. So if someone is gathering their evidence and said, okay, I have all of this stuff, then they can really easily look at that criteria and say, oh yeah, I'm missing either one, element of that student feedback or the work examples, right? And this micro-credential has 4 parts. This is kind of a rarity, where you have both the student reflections as well as the teacher reflections. And those are also going to be a pass, not pass. But yeah, so each micro-credential has different kinds of evidence that we ask for. So it could be videos of teacher-student interaction, unit plans, like parts of curriculum. There could be observations, things of that nature, but it's always really going to make sense for the competency. So we're asking for feedback here. And yeah, that's what we're going to be looking for in terms of the artifacts.
Kristen, I have another question
Yeah,
regarding, so, money is always a factor with teachers, right? So my question is, like, let's say a group of my colleagues, we were going to work together to work on a micro-credential that we all chose, so that way we had our little supportive network that was maybe closer together, knowing that Digital Promise has supports. But again, sometimes it helps if multiple people are working on the same thing at the same time. And so if we agree that we say, okay, we find one that we want to work on, do we need to pay for it right then? Or because I'm able to look at things, are we able to work on it, collect our evidence, do all of that? And then when we're ready to submit, then that's when we click on the apply and pay, or how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and first of all, I love that you'll work in a PLC together on these. Where we find that so, like, probably the best way of success in kind of anything really is to be working on these together with folks, because there's a lot of interaction of like, oh, what do you think they're asking for here? Do you think like this video would work, or this example of a template? Like, a lot of that goes into the success. So yes, like if you have a PLC and a group of folks that are working on one together, that's fantastic. Thank you for doing that. And a note, so everyone will want to, if you all are working on the same like document, for example, do say that you worked in a team on the document. And that way, if the assessor gets like 5 different submissions, but it has the same document, there's a little bit of context saying, I worked in tandem with other people. So just give a heads up.
And do they need to refrain from naming those other people? So they just say, I worked in a team of, and say the number of people, because to your point, having it be that double blind, we're not supposed to include names. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. You don't need to say names. You can just say, I worked in a team with other folks in this, and that'll be plenty. Because, you know, the reflections are all going to be like slightly different because everyone has a different point of view. But yeah, so if you have the same kind of, like, I don't think anyone works alone on a curriculum anymore. And so like, that's a really good example of like everyone on our content team like worked on a curriculum plan. Yeah, just giving a little bit more information, because then the assessor's like, oh, of course they all work together on their curriculum plan. That's a huge document. And so they'll know that it happens like that. But to your point, you do not have to apply or anything. You don't need to hit any sort of buttons until, actually, I'm just going to go ahead and let's do one. Yeah, let's do this one. So I'm just going to do a draft of this micro-credential. Okay, I confirm the work is my own. I confirm that it doesn't have any identifiable information, and confirm it's ready. And I can go ahead and hit save draft. So yeah, so there's a couple different ways that you can do this. You can save your draft again and again and again. And what will happen is it'll just save it in your dashboard. And where's my draft? There's my draft. So there we have my draft. And then I can come back and fiddle with it later for sure. You don't have to have any money kind of exchange hands until you're ready to submit that. Because what the money is really going towards is the assessors and their time, because they're often either, you know, educators who, you know, have been through this process and have shown that they have an expertise, and they can then assess after a period of time. Yeah. So let's see. Okay. So one thing I wanted to show kind of at the end of this whole process, let's say I was awarded a micro-credential. This is what the award will look like on Digital Promise. And folks will get an email and it says, you know, congratulations, you got your award, please share it out. And so we have all these different things, but I can also email my badge. And so this is what I was saying a little bit earlier, like I can enter Stanley's email address, I can include the evidence that I uploaded, as well as the feedback. And let's say this is a resubmission. Let's say I was denied the first time. If I was denied, I would have gotten an email that said, it was denied, but here's ways to try again. And here's ways to, you know, level up, or, you know, there's specific feedback within the micro-credential that they can take and then try again. Anyway, so let's say that I was denied and this is my award on my resubmission. I can send my coach the assessor feedback and those related submissions. So they get like everything. But this is also like by the educator's own admission. So they really have the power to say yes or no on all of these, and then I can hit share. And that link will be up and available for 24 hours, because we found that that's the timeline that folks really like to work on instead of 6 months or things like that. Yes, so I mentioned this a little bit, but in talking about like who are the folks in the system, and there's basically 3 people or 3 groups in the micro-credential ecosystem. There's the learners, there's the folks that want to show that they have the skill. There's the issuers, those folks like the Iris Center, like KQED, PBS, like National Geographic. Those are those subject matter experts that have partnered with Digital Promise to create microcredentials. And then there's the assessors who assess all the microcredentials, who are also usually part of those issuing organizations to do it. So the process is someone submits a microcredential, it goes to the issuer, they sign it to the assessor assesses it, goes back to the issuer who reviews it, who then makes that final call. And the assessor will make recommendations, but they won't make that final call. The issuer will do that. And that's why we have that double blind, is like making sure that all of those things are checked. There's no AI in the system. It's all real folks who really want to support educators in their growth and showing their expertise, because everyone's a professional and great at their job. So continuing that work. All right. So we did, I'm going to put, let's see, wait time. There we go. So I'll drop this in the chat as well, because this is often like a good starting point for folks. Another was, and you can tell that I was denied this last time, so I can reapply on this microcredential. But yeah, so this microcredential is all about wait time. And as you can tell, like the teacher makes effective use of wait time. And like, what is wait time? There's some good research behind there, and some student reflection and educator reflection. So you can tell, like, you're beginning to tell that like a lot of the framework that we've used for this is very similar, but the content itself is really different. Okay. Right, so this is what we were saying a little bit earlier. So when an assessor shares feedback on a learner submission, the learner has that opportunity to improve their practice and to benefit like their career and the learners that they work with every day. So it's important to understand the microcredential, its goal, and what to look for in the responses and the criteria submitted from the assessor's point of view. And I think of, as it says on the screen, the assessment of learning that occurred is aligned with the rubric indicated in the microcredential. And that's a lot of jargon. So what I mean to say by that is that we're assessing learning that has happened already, that they've been out in the world, they've really worked on their work for a period of time, and it's assessing that learning that has happened. And the assessment is also for learning. So if someone is trying to gain this skill and really working on it, the assessment can give feedback and give ways to find additional work, and not work, but additional PD or like areas to work on a little bit more. So yeah, and the educator can really work on that microcredential again if it needs to resubmit, and it'll go back to that same assessor. So even though they don't know who each other are, the microcredential the first time will go to assessor A, and if the person needs to resubmit, it'll go back to assessor A. It's not going to be kind of a bunch of different people in at the same time. It'll really keep consistent with who's assessing. And I think, so the last one that I wanted to share with you is kind of embedding this within your coaching practice. There's a couple of different ways. Like you can certainly go to the microcredential platform. You don't have to log in at all until you're ready to either save a draft or like submit your microcredential. So this is free and open. Like we really want to make sure that folks have access. And like the only login area is definitely like when you want to submit a microcredential. You don't need to log in or create anything like that. And we have them organized in a few different ways. You know, if we're looking for feedback, you just do keyword search right at the top. And you'll notice that we have 111 results on feedback, which is great. You can also look for different organizations if you know that you really want to work on something with a Clark County Education Association, we have their 20 micro-credentials right up here. But what I put in the chat was, there it is. This is a Micro-Credential Explorer. A few years ago, we put this together to just have a different form of visualization of micro-credentials. And so you can choose your role or the person you're coaching role. So I'm going to be a coach. And then let's make this bigger. Yeah. And the topic, let's see, I'm curious about ed camps. Cool. Oh, there's an ed camp organizer. So I can really, and then I can see all the different audience that ed camps and different topics if I want to do that. So I can also just view the micro-credential and it'll take me right there. You can also share, so a different way to use this. So I'm working with a classroom educator who is curious about challenge-based learning. Instead of just going to the individual micro-credential, I can save this search. So that URL was copied to your clipboard and you can just email that to someone and say, look at one of these micro-credentials and see if you like it. But this is just a different way of like engaging with content of the micro-credential content, because there are there 500? I think there's 499 or something like that. Yeah, there's a bunch of micro-credentials. So just like a different way of looking at it. Awesome. There are quite a few options. Let me see, I think the last thing that I wanted to share was definitely, so there's the Explorer, there's the platform, and there's also the Help Center. And I'll grab that link and pop it in the chat. Because we found that, you know, folks are exploring different ways of doing it and sometimes run into maybe the technical challenge, or if like a school wants to purchase a bunch of coupon codes so they're not passing that cost on to the educators. That's also a way of doing that. So there's a lot of different options. And there's also my email address. So I wanted to just say thank you again for being here and being engaged and thinking about micro-credentials as part of your practice. But I'm here if there's any questions or comments or anything you'd like me to dive more deeply into.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kristen. That was very informative. A great discussion. Thank you so much for sharing everything with us. Yeah, I think we can move on to a question and answer, like you said. If anybody has any questions, since we have a relatively small group, we can all just stay together instead of going into breakout groups. And feel free to ask Kristen any questions that you might have about micro-credentials. And we can just talk about whatever, micro-credentials appeal to you and any that you might have in mind.
I have a question, sir. This is Eggy from Wisconsin. I'm like really, really excited about the idea of using micro-credentials in coaching. And has anybody done that, or do you know anything more about that? How to get started with that? So I'm assuming, what I was thinking is, you know, they all have their professional learning goals, and we could tie them to whatever their passion learning project would be, and then they would get a credential. And so if somebody decides to do a credential, we could use the digital promise and search for them. Did I understand that correctly? Sorry. I hope
Yeah,
that makes sense.
that was perfect. That was right on track. We've definitely seen like less formal and then more formal uses of micro-credentials. The one that I'm thinking of is the Joab School District in Utah, where it's a small school district south of the Salt Lake City, and folks have designed their own learning path and where they'd like to go. And then what happens is they choose their micro-credentials, they meet with administration and say, these are the ones that I'm interested in. And then they're say, yep, go for it. And that's kind of it. Like they've tried to make it as low as a barrier as possible. But yeah, I think that's really the best way of going about it, is that, you know, having the educator really choose with your support, having that personalized kind of agency first is sometimes very different than the sit and get model. So anything that we can do to support is really great. But yeah, thank you for doing that.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Kristen, you had referenced the EdCamp Organizer Microcredential, which is a free microcredential. Are there other free microcredentials, and can you search for the free ones if you're kind of new to this and wanted to, you know, as Jen was saying earlier, you kind of want to try your hand at it, and kind of, you had mentioned the low-hanging fruit. Is there a way that you can look kind of at the free ones before you get into the more costly ones?
A great idea. I'm going to be adding filter for free. There isn't a way to filter for free, but there are certain ones that I definitely know, like there won't be a charge in them. For example, the Friday Institute at North Carolina State is a stack where the costs of assessing are built into their like their operating structure and things like that. So yeah, and I think, let me grab that link for you for sure. There we go. So Friday Institute is definitely one, and they have 36 micro-credentials. I think most of them are free. I think there are a couple of them in the 4 Cs do have a cost to them, but like they're 90% free. Yeah, I think, let me look. The media literacy micro-credentials. Sorry, my computer doesn't agree with the banging of the hammer that's going on behind me. The media literacy micro-credentials that KQED has put together are also free, I believe. But yeah, there is not currently a way to look at those and filter by free. And I think a couple different ways to maybe advocate for at your school district of using some of those funds to purchase on behalf of educators is something that has worked in the past, where a lot of the assessment fees range from, I think, $20 to $40. That's usually the kind of the sweet spot in the middle. And so if districts can pay on behalf and really like show that there's an outcome and there's an impact of using competency-based learning and using like putting the skills first, rather than investing in kind of a sit and get type of professional development. They're really happy with that. So yeah, I'm gonna grab the PBS ones for sure. And the interesting thing about the PBS, KQED PBS micro-credentials is at the end of, I think if you earn 8 micro-credentials, you have like a PBS media literacy certification at the end of it. And it's, yeah, and I think they've implemented it in Wisconsin, as well as out here in California, and I think in Montana. So there's like affiliates that are working with them as well. Yeah, but good question, Allison. I'll ask if we can do a filter by free.
I have 2 questions for you that kind of go in different directions. One is, this kind of seems like a silly question, but I know someone else would ask too, would be, how do people present these or display these? Like, do they write them on their resumes, on a paper resume, if they're applying for jobs? Do they just put the badges, you know, behind their names and their tagline? How do you see people using or displaying what they've done?
Yeah. Let's start with that first question, and then we can definitely go on to your second one. The first question is, the thing that we see the most is we see them being shared out on Twitter. And then some districts do have an incentive program for them. So I've mentioned the Clark County. So folks do get a pay bump if they do a certain number of micro-credentials, as well as like, you know, a step up in that pay grade. So that's like the direct, that's the incentive, right? So if districts have a program and then there's bonuses and things of that nature. But the mechanism for kind of sharing them out, I've seen it shared out on Twitter. I've definitely seen these in folks's email kind of signature for sure, and then also on LinkedIn. In terms of resumes, I think I've seen it on, you know, achievements and credentials, things like that. But mostly like because it's a digital badge, I've seen it more in the digital sphere rather than a resume. Yeah, cool. They're in your email signature. Very nice. Yeah, I'm similar to when folks have like their Google admin or their Google Classroom kind of credentials. Yeah. So it was your first question. What did you have a second question?
Well, I do. I'm kind of thinking about this with two different hats on.
Awesome.
Yeah. So the other question is looking at it from, I'm thinking about one organization I work with where we would like, I think this would be great to use this type of thing for PD so that it's not all, you know, generic and general and sit and get that kind of thing. And do the organizations, if you do that on an organizational level, does the whole organization buy in, or do they just kind of sponsor teachers in general by paying for their particular credentials?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've seen it a few different ways. And definitely, like, I've cautioned against folks saying like everyone in the organization has to do a micro-credential, because then mandating it, it's like, oh, well, it doesn't fit with my schedule. And so it's another thing. So if it's like a portion, if someone can opt in and say, I'd like to do a micro-credential, or there are folks that love to go to webinars and be there and get their CU at the end of it. So like making sure that the learning is really relevant to whomever's in the room. So making micro-credential like an element as an opt-in if someone wants to do it is, I've seen that be really successful. And then let's see, at the organization level, yeah. And I think that's probably the a success metric that I've seen is when administrators as well as classroom educators are there in the room to make those decisions, then it's successful, right? So if it's coming from one end of the spectrum or the other, that's kind of tricky. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
Okay, I think so.
Okay.
Okay, and then the second half of that with a different hat on is, how do organizations become those subject area experts? You know, how, like if I wanted to offer a micro-credential, what would that process be like?
Totally.
Or is that on the website somewhere that I can find?
It is, but I'm happy to talk about it. So essentially, you probably have a conversation with my colleague Casey, who's our partnerships manager, and he basically talks to everyone who's interested in becoming an issuer to talk about like what the goals are, who the audience is, what kind of subject matter expertise you hold at the organization. And oh, sorry, just got distracted by Mafuza's great comment. Yeah, and then we have a conversation about like what is the skill that you'd like to make sure that you're building your micro-credential around. Yeah, so there's a little bit of like conversations around that subject matter expertise. And if there's like a larger goal of perhaps you have a subject matter expertise in literacy in refugee populations, is there someone in your organization that can write that, and like is that source of expertise, or do we need to like partner with another organization to kind of work on that collaboratively? So we tend to like really think about this network approach in like, I'm bringing the framework expertise, you're bringing the subject matter expertise, and like who out there can we really bring in to build something that's lovely and useful for everyone.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and so I wanted just to call out Mafuza's comment in the chat is that, yes, wanting to give the same opportunities for teachers to advocate for their own learning. And that's one of the reasons why I love micro-credentials so much, is like, it really is placing that agency and your expertise kind of back in their hands rather than something that is directive.
Hi, Kristen. Sorry, I was late to the table today. I had some internet
okay.
issues. But where I first learned about micro-credentials was with the Micro-credential conference in Kentucky. I don't know if you mentioned that earlier. But what really stuck out for me was when the teachers from Kentucky talked about the value of how they felt in terms of elevated in their own lifelong learning. Like they had a panel that kind of shared a little bit about how they just felt really valued by the state, that the state would let them, for their professional growth, choose what they needed to grow instead of saying, you have to do this, you know? And I mean, I live in California where they have to do this, you know what I mean, for their credentials. And it really said a lot to have those teachers up there saying, wow, you know, somebody's really listening to us. And long after we have our credentials, we still get a chance to learn more. So I think there's a lot of value in that.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you for sharing, Belinda. The Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative is an organization that we work with quite frequently. And in working with folks there, we definitely do want to echo what you were saying, but and I live in a very close area in California. We don't have a lot of space between us. And so one of the things they shared with us was that, you know, Kentucky is a large state that has a lot of, it's rural. There could be miles between your closest neighbor, and there's pockets of deep poverty. And so showing that there are digital connections between folks in areas in Kentucky that can still show these experts, educators that are not only, you know, they're looking at audiences, you know, kids and families from the point of view of, you know, they're in poverty. What's the best way to educate students that have this poverty background, but coming from a strength-based perspective? I'll put in the chat their micro-credentials, but at the same time, assisting students with leadership skills who might have disabilities. But yeah, no, huge fans of our partners in Kentucky for sure. What other questions do folks have, and how can I be of service? I'm working on my wait time, as you can tell.
Right. If anyone doesn't have a question at the moment, we have Kristen's email right there in the chat, kfranklin@digitalpromise.org. I'm sure she would love to get your questions. But maybe we can share out some stuff that, you know, some aha moments, or anything that we learned that we'll definitely take with us from this discussion, or anything we're excited about for micro-credentials. All right, no problem. I know it's the tail end of some folks' days, so no problem. How many there are? Yeah, they have a lot in Mafusa, so definitely check them out, and you know, take advantage of everything that we have to offer. Okay, well, I guess we can get into the wrap-up portion of our session. Allison, do you mind sharing your screen? We just want to give you guys some stuff to look forward to in the upcoming workshops. Yeah, there we go. All right, thanks, Allison. All right, so again, we're going to have more great workshops just like this. Also going to be very informative and engaging. So be on the lookout. We're going to have more details as they become available, but definitely mark these dates on your calendar. March 29th is going to be the next one. Then the two following up from that are going to be April 26th and May 31st. And of course, we got a lot more to come. So make sure you mark those down on your calendar just so you can save space, for that ahead of time. And yes, the March 29th one is going to be how to communicate with influence. So we're going to take some of the stuff we learned from micro-credentials and apply what we want to learn. Then we're going to look at, okay, how do we communicate that to the people that we're coaching? And it's sure to be a great one. We have a good partner for that session. And it should be very informative and very engaging, just like this one. So be on the lookout, and we'll be sending those calendar dates out to you soon. So I just want to give a round of applause again to my co-hosts, Kristen Franklin and Allison Modica. And I want to thank all of you for coming by. Appreciate, all the hard work that you all do and, taking the time to meet up and have these great discussions. I see Mafuza just put something in the chat. I like to incorporate micro-credentials. Learning to work with my district to look at micro-credentials, being a Mr. Development of STEAM. That's great, Mafuza. And whatever way we can help you all in your practice, definitely reach out. My email is fdberry@digitalpromise.org. So feel free to reach out or reply to any of those posts in our coaching thread, and I'll get back to you. So we're going to give you about 9 minutes back of your evening. And thanks again for stopping by. And we're looking forward to seeing you all again. Have a good evening.